Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning for this brief webinar on surviving the increasing demands on data for rankings and accreditations. For those of you who do not know me, just very briefly, my name is Axel. I'm a business development manager at Academ by RIMA 1. And at Academ, we work with roughly 120 schools all over the world to help them with their data management for accreditations. But this morning, this is not going to be a sales presentation, but rather on the topic of generally managing data for rankings and accreditations. So we won't go into that further. Generally, everyone is talking about data these days, and data has become super important. There's actually this quote from David Buckingham that data is the new oil. And this is true in a sense. If we look at some of the most valuable, biggest companies these days, we're talking about companies like Facebook, Google, Amazon, Apple, Tesla, Uber, Airbnb, platforms that heavily rely on data, that have a plethora of data, which makes them extremely powerful, extremely valuable. But obviously, we all deal with data, and we have to deal with data also in this very special times of COVID-19, which is the result of us being in this virtual conference these days rather than meeting in person as we were supposed to in Trieste this year. And what makes data so interesting is not the data itself, an individual data set, but putting data into context, creating meaningful relationships between data sets. And actually, what we've seen with COVID-19, we're also seeing manipulation of data or putting data in a relation in a way that allows us to tell a certain narrative. This has become extremely popular in the COVID-19 pandemic with some governments around the world. I'm going to mention them namely, but it's huge, as you may know who I'm talking about. And this is simply putting into context, for instance, death rates per 100,000 capita population, or as you see on the right, the two graphics, how they actually differentiate, instead comparing the case fatality ratios. And this is just two examples of how looking at data sets where the data is basically the same, but the relationship is different, and how that can potentially tell a different story in how we deal with data. As data is everywhere, and as you know, we have to deal with data also in higher education a lot. What we like to talk about is data-driven organizations these days. And there are companies out there, organizations out there who do a tremendous job in helping them analyze data, using data to give them a competitive advantage. Now, the three stages we talk about in data-driven organizations is starting at the descriptive level, where we basically use post-facto data. So we look at data from the past, we analyze that, we look at business reports that show us past data, and we try to draw conclusions from that. Now, the next level would be predictive data, where we take the historic data we have, combine that with predictions about future developments, and try to derive then from developments that can help us give us a competitive advantage, and make us or help us become more effective and more efficient in our everyday jobs. And then obviously the final level, the disruptive level, where we really try to use this data to come up with new solutions, new services, new products, and really make the most out of that data, whatever that may be. Now, as you may assume, higher education institutions, business schools, universities, 99% of them are on that descriptive stage. Now, in the schools we work with, there are some great examples around the world who do a fantastic job in already trying to make predictions about future developments in terms of rankings, in terms of their accreditation strategies, in terms of future student applications and admissions data, external factors, risk factors, and a lot more. And this is really where we need to get with in higher education if we want to keep a competitive advantage to the competition, to the other universities and schools that we compete with in getting the best talent. As you know from experience, and this sort of brings us to the topic of this webinar, the offer of accreditations and rankings is huge. Now, the examples you see here, they should all be familiar to you. Those are accreditation agencies, networks, rankings, some of the most well-known one to the business world, but this is just those related to business schools and business faculties. And this is not even all of them. This is just a selection when we're not including some others due to space restrictions on the slide, all the national organizations there as well. And then obviously all those accreditations, networks, and rankings beyond business schools. So the offer is huge. So just to give you one example of one school, and it's actually a well-known school, HEC Paris, one of the best schools in France, they on their website alone have 27 rankings listed. They're also Triple Crown. They have their national accreditations. So they are already in that game of having to maintain data for a lot of different rankings and accreditations. And this is also true for you, I suppose. Because what happens is, at the end, as I was already saying, we're competing for talent in higher education, right? We're competing for the best students, for the best faculty, for the best admin staff. And while we're all peers, while we're all in the same boat, we're still competing for those. And one way to compete is obviously through achieving accreditations and rankings. Now, if you achieve one accreditation and all of your peers have that very same accreditation, then obviously, how do you differentiate them? So you start looking at a second accreditation, maybe. You start looking at rankings also. And this is technically an endless game, because obviously your competition will have the same thoughts. So suddenly all of us have multiple accreditations, multiple rankings, and this becomes very, very complex. For all of those rankings and accreditations, there's a plethora of data that we need. Just to give you some examples, we need data on our faculty. Who do we have in the faculty body in terms of diversity, internationalization, experience, fields, etc. We need research data. What's the research output, quality of research, research projects, student data, again, diversity, internationalization, quality of students in terms of admission tests, admission ratios that we might have at the school, corporate connections, the companies we work with, how do we work with them, executive education, is that something you offer? Who do you offer it to? What level do you offer it on? Do you offer it to the CEOs, to the middle management, or to the everyday employee? Financials. What is your budget? Are you profitable? What do you allocate the budget for? Many, many data points that we need to touch upon. And this is the issue that I think many of us face in dealing then with multiple accreditations and multiple rankings. While all of those are asking for data in one of those aspects, they're all asking slightly differently. And that is part of what we're talking about today, is coming to the point of we need to look at data in a broad sense and collect it in a meaningful way that allows us to collect data once and use it for multiple purposes. But when we collect data and manage data, there's a lot of things to consider, potential hurdles that we might come across, and I'm sure you've faced most of them yourselves already in your own experiences. For instance, we need to involve stakeholders. And if we remember about the data we need, those stakeholders, for instance, are our faculty, our companies we work with, external lecturers, alumni, students sometimes themselves, and many others along the way, internal stakeholders. Yeah, we might need to collect data from the admissions office, we might need to collect data from the provost, so different aspects that we all need to combine. And when we collect this data, then obviously you have that need that you need to collect the data, but the people you're asking for data might not share that same need. And they have their own things to do. They are busy. And if they don't have the data ready in the way you need it, it means extra work for them. So you need to convince them that actually it's important for you to collect the data from them. So you need to show the value added of the data that you're currently collecting for an accreditation or for ranking. Also, when you collect that data, you need to analyze it to see if there is a certain gap that you're currently not meeting in, for instance, in line with an accreditation standard. There might be some actions required for your school to take. So this is, again, something that you need to trigger with the dean, with the president of the university, get them to take meaningful actions for you to meet necessary requirements. So as you may see already from those hurdles, data collection is also communications job. And communication is one of the big assets in that area. Communicating what you need, why you need it, and why it's beneficial for everyone. Another big topic is data protection, and something that we know already a lot with GDPR, and GDPR being one of the reasons why we see, for instance, all those very annoying cookie acceptance pop-ups on every website that we visit where we have to give consent of our data being collected. But this is also obviously true for data we collect on the school level. There's a lot of sensitive data that we need to use for accreditations and rankings. Contractual data, data on time spent for research, for teaching, potentially financial data, data on publications, on administrative tasks, you name it. So you need to be aware of first having consent from your faculty to actually collect and store that data and use that data, but then also making sure how you store the data and who has access to the data. And how do you deal with faculty actually say, you know what, I'm not giving you that data. Some schools deal with that by simply putting a clause in every faculty contract where they actually make them sign with the contract, we're allowed to use your data and you consent. But not everyone has that, and this still might raise some issues. And there's more. Once we collect the data, we also have to think about storing of data. Do we store data? And this is something that many schools do at first. They simply put it in Excel spreadsheets. Now, this may be fine for a lot of things, but storing things in Excel, especially when it comes to the sensitive data, is usually not GDPR compliant. It also bears the issue of accessibility of that data, because you may put it in an Excel spreadsheet, put it somewhere on a file server, and you cannot really control the access. Because in all honesty, who of you puts a password protected spreadsheet or protects a folder where the files are in with a password? Some schools are using faculty management systems for it. Some may have homegrown systems that they've built with Access, Power BI or other tools, and built their homegrown databases for all the data. Either way, this is something to consider, and it's very important. And then also, where do you store the data? Do you store it locally on a file drive? Do you have a university server? Do you store it in the cloud on OneDrive, Dropbox, Amazon Cloud, you name it? But then again, consider data protection along the way, depending on where you store data. And then guaranteeing access and usability of data collected. You know, you may have somebody in your team who collects data for an accreditation. They store it locally on their laptop, then the laptop gets lost. Or the person leaves the university, but they have not shared the files properly with the rest of the team. So suddenly data is lost. And another very, very big issue or topic is quality of data. And this comes back to, you know, thinking globally about the data and making sure that you can reuse data for multiple purposes. So completeness of data, but also correctness of data. We see a lot issues, especially when it comes to publications of faculty, where there are minor errors, typos, issues in clustering and categorizing publication data that leads to incorrect data. Sometimes this may lead to situations where you simply don't meet an accreditation standard, supposedly, although you actually do. There's just an error in the data. But we've also seen manipulation of data, and there have been some cases, especially in the US, if you may have heard of it. I think Poets and Quants reported on that in the past, where there were a couple of US schools who manipulated research data to give them an edge in certain MBA rankings. And when that eventually showed up, there was a huge scandal, of course. That also brings us to biases in collecting data from certain sources. One example, when I was still an accreditation manager, is we had the discussion when it came to, okay, how do schools work with companies, trying to collect, the relationships that individual faculty had with companies. And some were saying to us, well, the system doesn't capture how many companies we spoke with, only the ones we actually work with. Which of course is a point, but then obviously you come to the point, what do we actually value? Are we actually interested in all the calls they're having, or are we only interested in, the effective relationships that are being built? And we need validation processes when we collect data to ensure that data quality, to really making sure, 4I principle, have somebody check on the data to make sure you have high quality data that is meaningful for all your purposes. What we should not forget, though, is no matter how you collect data and how you store it, the resource factor. And this is a big one. If you try to do things manually, obviously that human factor is even greater than when you use a system, but it's a factor anyway. You need people to collect the data, to validate the data, and to then put it into context, to analyze it for you. So there's a human factor either way. But also the human factor is with the stakeholders. So if you're trying to collect data, for instance, from alumni, you do maybe alumni surveys where you ask them about their employment record, to do graduate surveys, or you ask them to participate for certain rankings. That is time they need to invest, even if it's just 10 or 15 minutes. But especially as you do the accreditation and rankings game, those might add up because you might ask them 5-6 times a year, so the time adds up. So communicate with them, ensuring them, okay, this is also something that you profit from, because if your alma mater ranks highly and is renowned for being a good school, then obviously that reflects on you because you come from that school. Looking a bit at the faculty picture when it comes to data is also coming back to the different stakeholders, because data is in different places, even from the faculty point of view. So if I'm a faculty member, I know that I hold certain data myself, like my publication lists, my teaching data, and everything I do. But then obviously there is an HR system that holds data on me, all my contractual data. The program management has information on how I teach, where I teach, who I teach. The IT has some basic data for me that allows me to connect with all the university systems. The dean's office might have some data on me, some aggregated data for my promotion reviews, etc. So different sources that hold data. And this is where a database usually comes in handy, because a faculty database or a faculty management system then allows the school to bring together data from different sources, accumulate it, and make meaningful sense out of it for all those accreditations and rankings, so that an accreditation team or a quality management team, whoever is in charge of those processes, has access to all the different data points. The key then is, and that brings us back to managing multiple accreditations and multiple rankings, is to store all the different data from all those different sources that we just looked at and reuse them for multiple purposes. And for that, we actually need to look beyond just rankings and accreditations. Now, obviously, those are two very important factors that use a lot of resources, but there's other aspects as well, like updating faculty profiles on the university website, annual appraisal talks that faculty have with the dean, CVs that need to be created for national and international accreditations, but also for the website, publication reports that the faculty use, but again, that you also might need for different purposes like rankings and accreditations. Then the accreditation ranking data itself, but also fact sheets that you might want to publish on the university website on your About section. We have XYZ faculty members from all those departments, from all those countries, very diverse group of faculty who do this, that, and that. So different things, and if you do it smartly, you collect all that data from multiple sources in one system and have multiple outputs for all those different purposes to try to reduce that heavy workload that comes with the increasing complexity of multiple accreditations and multiple rankings. Now, obviously, in this half hour, it's hard to really touch upon all those different points in depth. But just to summarize briefly on what to focus on for your upcoming management of data for all the rankings and accreditations. How do you survive that? And 4 key points to really keep in mind here. Focus on quality of data. If you don't have quality data, you will have to collect data over and over again. So really take a step back, review all the different accreditations, rankings, and internal purposes for which you need data. Identify what exactly you need, group it in the different categories that we previously saw, so faculty, students, research, financials, corporate connections, executive education, and then come up with a data collection method that has all those different aspects for all the different accreditations and rankings in mind and allows you to collect once for all the purposes. But then also have validation processes in place. That's really key to ensuring quality of data. Accountability of stakeholders, that's another important factor. Make those people that you collect data from accountable for what they provide. Make them data owners. Make them aware of the fact if they provide false data, whether it's on purpose or not, highly affects your accreditation and ranking purposes. Because if you do provide false data and this becomes apparent, then you're in trouble. Whether it's on purpose or not, that's usually hard to prove in the end. But also make them aware of why it's important that they provide that data. Focus on reusable data, because what we have, and there's one term that we hear a lot when we talk to schools, is that famous term accreditation fatigue, or ranking fatigue also. And that comes up, obviously, if we have to ask people over and over again for the same data, for the same things. So that's why make sure when you have collected the data that you store it and manage it in a way that you can keep reusing it over and over again over a time period, so that you do not end up with the faculty asking you or telling you, well, I've provided that data already 3 times in the past year. What do you actually do all day? But then also create transparency and validity. Make the data available. Show faculty how that comes into being. I've had situations in the past where faculty were telling me, look, why am I ranking at the bottom in terms of research output in our faculty? I've done so much. And then you show them, look, this is what I have on file for you. This is what I have on file for them. So maybe you haven't provided everything that you've done, and that's why. But also share data internally. Make it available to the provost, to the dean, to the president, so they can use that data for internal management decisions in the strategic process of the school or the university to further develop and improve your institution. At the end of the day, though, and as you may already guess, I'm an enthusiast for data and having data and using data. But I also have to admit, at the end, it's important to find the right balance of data. It's not just good enough to collect as much data as possible and going crazy on that. You have to find the right balance. Because as I said before, it's resource intensive. There's resources that we need in terms of IT, storage, but also the human element of collecting data and making sense of it. So try to avoid working in silos. Yeah, don't have different departments collecting data and keeping it to themselves. Make it accessible, share it, and like this, avoid redundancies. And feed it into the school's strategy. Link it to that. Keep in mind the legal requirements. As I was saying, one popular aspect, obviously, especially for us here in Europe, GDPR compliance. And keep in mind the user's needs, not just your own, but also other departments, other stakeholders that might be using your data. And in the end, don't overload your system and make it easy to use. Because as we know, people are leaving the institution. We have a turnover once in a while. So make sure that people who follow, people who are new to the team, have easy access to the data in place. They know how to work it, and they can make use of it for the future. Now, just in time, I hope I didn't rush too much through the topic. And as you can imagine, as I said, obviously there's a lot of aspects that we could talk about a lot more in detail. But given the time constraint, I hope I gave a brief overview of what to consider and how to potentially survive managing data for all those massive amounts of rankings and accreditations that we deal with every day. I'm open for some questions if you do have some. If you don't manage to ask them right now, or if you don't want to ask them here in public right now, I'll be also at the virtual exhibition booth for the rest of the day, so you can reach out to me there in person and ask me personally if you prefer.
Axel, let me just quickly jump in and first of all say thank you for your very interesting presentation. From what I see, you have come up with a 4-step survival plan for data management for us, so thank you for that. We do have some questions in the chat, so perhaps I can read some of them for you and you can answer. So we have a question from Ines Luca, and she's asking, could you suggest any tool to use for data collection?
Okay, so now this is actually becoming a sales talk then, because obviously I would recommend our own system, Academ. Obviously, this is just one system. There are other options in the market. I won't lie about that. But Academ is one of those database tools that allows you to manage data for multiple accreditations and for various rankings. So this is a good place to start. But there are others in the market, of course, as well. So it really depends which tool works best for you.
Okay, thank you for your answer. And we have another question from Rokram Shak. He's asking, with so many different accreditation and different things that the agencies are looking at, how to collect the data and structure it in a way to make it as universally usable as possible?
Well, this is some work to be done. So I think in the first step, look at all the accreditations you already have and those that you might be aiming for. Same for the accreditations. And then break down what data they are asking for and break it down really to small steps. So for instance, if we look at one quick example, faculty data. Break that faculty data down to things like age of the faculty, nationality by passport, diversity, experience, their field of expertise, and maybe some more elements. And then you'll see for each accreditation and each ranking what exactly or which data point is each one looking for. So like this, you can collect all of those data points once on faculty and use it for the different purposes. Now, a system like Academ has many of those built in. Like, for instance, if you take all the accreditations, the big accreditations that you saw on my previous slide, all of them are built into the system. So when you collect data with Academ, Academ will collect the data in a way that you already have it ready for all those different accreditations. Of course, this is something you can do yourself. Take an Excel spreadsheet, go through all the standards, read through everything, and build your own system that does it for you. But that's what I would recommend to do before starting to collect data.
Great, thank you. I do have another question from my side. You were talking about the legal requirements when it comes to the GDPR. So in your own experience of your company, do you believe that the schools are sufficiently aware of it?
It depends. We have schools that are very aware of GDPR and that take it very seriously. We've had some clients who came on board in the last 1 or 2 years who specifically asked us to have a meeting with their data protection officer before they signed the contract. And we had to answer a lot of questions about how we deal with data protection. We even had to sign some additional contracts with some who about managing data, although we do not access the data. So some do a lot of work on this and take this very seriously. But we're also talking to schools who don't mind having data stored somewhere on US servers, sensitive faculty data on US servers, which technically is not allowed, or who store it in Excel spreadsheets openly available on university servers, and who claim that's fine. But if you take GDPR seriously, that's a huge issue, and this is something you shouldn't be doing. So we see a lot of light, but we also see a lot of shade. I hope this was useful for those listening in. And yeah, as Lajana said, if you'd like to follow up on the discussion, happy to meet all of you in the exhibition area or in the next coffee break. So thank you for having me, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.